Good afternoon. My name is Bertin Martens. I work at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission and I'm an economist. The Joint Research Center is not a policy DG in the Commission, it is a scientific service that supports the other policy makers in Brussels. I would like to use this occasion to present to you a study that we have recently concluded on the economic impact of car data access regimes. As you know, there is a lot of debate, and there has been a lot of debate over the last couple of years on the technical conditions for access to data and the legal requirements that may be coupled with that. However, this study focuses on economic use. A lot of the debate has been on external versus internal access to car data, on an external server or on an internal platform in the car. In this study we look at 5 different options. We look at the external server, the extended vehicle standard that has been proposed by a number of vehicle manufacturers. We also look at third-party servers. On the other hand, we look at the number of internal access gateways to the data via an onboard platform that's either operated by the manufacturer or by a third party, or through the OBD and a plugged-in dongle that may also open access to external platforms. Let us start with the external data server operated by the vehicle manufacturer, or the extended vehicle standard that is often known. It introduces a number of data cost issues in the debate, namely latency, some delays in the transmission of the data from the car to the server. It also reduces somehow the amount of data that will be transmitted, because telecommunication of data from the car to the vehicle is costly, and so only a limited number of data points will be needed. Of course, the vehicle manufacturer has read and write access to all the data. It has a monopoly on the control of these data flows and will try to use that monopoly to maximize its revenue from that. It may allow third parties to access the data, either directly through straightforward data sales or indirectly through data services sales. But it will appropriate the benefits of these sales through the pricing and other access conditions of the data. Now, the vehicle manufacturer also retains a privileged market overview, because it observes all the flows of data between drivers, cars, the server, and after-sales, aftermarket service providers. So this market overview is very valuable because it gives a better overview than each of the individual service providers have on each of the individuals. There is no level playing field in this situation. It may well be that the vehicle manufacturer gives privileged access to some partners, for instance to authorized maintenance providers and authorized car dealers, or to other integrated services or chosen service partners, for instance for navigation service operators. Vehicle manufacturers, or some of them, are also known to have vertical agreements with insurance companies, with financing, and with other types of services. So this squeezes independent service providers out of the market, and that's one of the main concerns, of course, that you have with regard to this situation. However, vehicle manufacturers may be limited in the extent to which they can squeeze out independent service providers, because it may have a negative impact on their car sales. If the car offers a limited number of service options, a limited number of data services options, it may be less attractive to consumers. Now, there is a big debate among economists on how rational consumers are at the moment when they buy a car, in terms of whether they look at what the cost of after-sales services is. This is an oft question. Now let us have a look at a third-party service provider. During some of the debates between stakeholders, a neutral server was proposed, or dealing with a third-party server, and there are a number of examples, Otonomo and Caruso for example, but there are other types of third-party servers that work more closely with vehicle manufacturers such as IBM Bluemix and Microsoft Azure, so there are different variations on that theme. A common characteristic of these external third-party servers is that they add additional latency to the data, of course, because there is an intermediate step involved in this. An advantage of them is that they allow for data aggregation across vehicle manufacturers. It takes the data out of the silos of a manufacturer, of a brand-based data silo, and offers a possibility to aggregate data and give a better market overview at a lower cost also, because these third-party servers may amortize the fixed cost of setting up the whole system over a number of vehicle manufacturers, a number of aftermarket service providers. It may also lower the cost for aftermarket service providers, because instead of having to go to each and every vehicle manufacturer, they can now go to a single intermediary who can offer them access to their services. This third-party server will also maximize revenues and will may be using similar methods to do that. It may not guarantee a level playing field, unless there may be competition between several party servers that have access to the same. A major weakness of this system is that the third-party server, of course, depends on the vehicle manufacturer for the data supply and for write access to the car in case it wants to send a message to the driver. That has turned out to be a major stumbling block for a number of third-party servers that have tried to launch themselves in this market. And so far, perhaps not with the sort of success they had before. Now, let us look at a number of internal options. Internal access to the data via an onboard platform, first of all. Sometimes Toyota is mentioned as an example of this, but there is discussion on whether the Toyota current setup is actually an onboard platform. But in theory, this is an ideal world, a perfect world, because there's no latency and there is, in theory at least, access to all the data collected by the car, because there is no communication cost to bring the data outside. This possibly reduced communication cost has many advantages because it allows for edge computing and data analysis inside the car. And transmitting only a reduced set of data outputs to a remote server. In practice, however, the system is very similar to an external vehicle manufacturer operated server. It allows for privileged market overview by the company that operates the internal platform, and there is not necessarily a level playing field in read and write access conditions to the driver and to the car. Still, the vehicle manufacturer maintains incentives to work with privileged partners, authorized dealers and other partners with which it has signed contractual arrangements. I think that in future, when automated driving platforms will become more common, onboard platforms will become inevitable, because automated driving systems cannot operate from a remote server. Latency is far too high and it doesn't work that way. Then the question will become, of course, who operates that onboard automatic driving platform? Is it the vehicle manufacturer who has developed this platform? Or is it a third party that has developed the platform and installs it in the vehicle that was manufactured by a vehicle manufacturer? These are questions to which we don't have clear answers yet at the moment, because both options turn out to be, there are a number of experiments ongoing with both of these options. There has been a big debate also on the OBD dongle and the possibility to use it an external platform that is connected to cars via the OBD dongle. And there are many examples already of businesses that have tried to set up a business model around such a dongle. Access is real-time to the OBD plug, but the data set is often limited to a subset of existing data. This varies by vehicle manufacturer, even by models produced by a single vehicle manufacturer. So this is not always the most optimal situation. If it's being used for a single application only, say an insurance service, a pay-as-you-drive insurance service, or a leasing company service that operates through the dongle service, then it's a limited service only, and it's not really the most interesting sort of application. I think it's more interesting when we look at multiple applications that can run on the same OBD dongle. But this requires transmitting the data to a third-party platform again, and so we end up again with the option of a third-party platform. There are internal third-party platforms that can be installed in the car. And we have examples of some brands in some of their models allow Google and Apple operating systems to be installed. In theory, again, these operating systems could have full access to all the internal car data. In practice, this is not necessarily the case. Also, in a number of cases, service providers have to pay the vehicle manufacturer for access to these data, or they have to pay the platform, the Google and Apple platform, to get access to the data and use them for their services. There are many ways in which vehicle manufacturers, for example, can build in obstacles by charging a subscription fee, for example, for these operators. And as such, again, there is no guarantee for a level playing field. The vehicle manufacturer or the platform operator itself may block certain aftermarket service providers to get access to this. If you go today to the Google or Apple app stores for car apps, you will see that there are many apps for media or sometimes for navigation services, but there are hardly ever any, if none at all, apps for, say, insurance, for leasing, for aftermarket service providers, for maintenance service providers. There are obstacles clearly at work at this moment already to introducing that type of services via third-party internal platforms. Also in this case, the platform has a privileged market overview, even more so than the vehicle manufacturer, because these third-party platforms have an overview of the market across many brands and models of cars. And so a better overview than the vehicle manufacturer itself, and that may be one strong reason why vehicle manufacturers are not necessarily entirely happy about letting these platforms into their cars and having access to all the data in the car. On the other hand, these third-party platforms may offer stronger innovation incentives, more cost savings, more external data links. They can link to other data sets that drivers generate at home or in other devices that they use with similar operating systems. It offers seamless connections between all these different devices and operating systems. So there are some advantages there. Now, let me conclude by discussing a few economic questions here. Which of these scenarios produces more innovation, more consumer welfare, and can regulatory intervention help to achieve this? I think this is the central policy question that we face here. What can we learn from the current situation? What are vehicle manufacturer strategies to date? We see that several vehicle manufacturers are trying to reduce access to internal car data sets, whether it's stored on the external server or accessed through an internal gateway inside the car. They are not very happy about abandoning or giving up their data rent situation, their data monopoly situation. We can also ask ourselves the questions, are there any benefits from allowing discrimination between different types of aftermarket service providers? Would it generate more innovation? Would it avoid data fragmentation? Would there be cost savings in doing so? These are questions to which we don't have clear answers at the moment. Also, the question of consumer rationality has been insufficiently answered. Do consumers really look at competitive aftermarket services and the cost of these services when they buy a car? This is at the moment. So if all these conditions are not fulfilled, how can we increase competition to avoid that vehicle manufacturers start using their data monopoly to take over downstream services in aftermarkets and put pressure on these downstream services? There are a number of available policy tools, but they have limited impact at the moment. There's competition policy tools, the so-called essential data facility. It's not easy to prove that data are an essential input into an aftermarket service. There may be substitute inputs to that. In any case, this has to be viewed on a case-by-case basis. You go through a lengthy competition policy process. You're talking about years here to achieve any progress on this front. There is the regulatory option, of course. We all know the type approval regulation that regulates access to the OBD, for example. But that in itself is not enough, as we have seen, because even if you have access to the OBD, these data have to be taken to a third-party platform in order to do something meaningful with these data. And platform competition is required in order to bring some competition in these in this platform business through the OBD gate. There's also the EU GDPR, the data protection regulation that pertains to personal data only. Now, car data are assumed to be personal data. And Article 20 of the GDPR allows data to be ported. The driver, the person whose data are collected by the car, can ask the manufacturer to take the data to another platform or service provider of the driver's choice. At the moment, this is a bit of an embryonic and somewhat conceptual article in the GDPR. How this will be implemented in practice is not very clear. There are precedents and examples where this was implemented on a real-time basis, for example, without additional charges. But even if the driver takes his data out of the car to a platform of his choice, he will still have to look for a platform or a service provider. And who will that be? And what will be the conditions offered by that platform? Questions that we still have to look for, to look for answers to these questions. We can learn from the experience with platforms in other sectors, where network effects play an important role. But when that is the case, the platform is usually in a stronger position than individual service providers. So whichever platform the service providers work with, this may exercise some pressure on them. Also, we know that with hardware costs, lock-in into particular platforms is almost inevitable. Look at your own mobile phones, your smartphones. You buy a Google smartphone, you're locked into the Android platform. You buy an Apple smartphone, you're locked into the iPhone platform and that app store. And changing a telephone is costly, changing a car is even more costly. So that consumers, once they bought the device, they are locked into that. So these were some considerations from our study. I thank you for your attention. Unfortunately, I cannot join you today for this event, but if there are any questions, please feel free to ask the organizers to convey them to me. Thank you very much.